Freddie Mercury startled his followers in 1991 by keeping a secret. For years the Queen's singer concealed the fact that he was dying. His voice remained strong despite his frail body. To conceal how ill he was, he shot his final video in black and white. He stopped taking all medications save painkillers in his last days. He passed only a day after sharing what he had with the world. What actually transpired with Freddie Mercury in his last days is being revealed today. Freddie Mercury was born in Stonetown, Zanzibar on September 5, 1946, as Faruk Bulsara, Bomi and Jeris. His parents were Parsis with Indian ancestry. They were from Bulsar, which is today Valsad, a tiny city in Gujarat. The Zoroastrian religion, which originated in ancient Persia, was practiced by his family. Freddie was noticeable right away. He later thought that his odd mouth structure, which had 4 extra teeth at birth, was the source of his powerful singing voice. He could play anything from high soprano to profound bass, because Zanzibar was still ruled by the British. He was also born a British subject. Later on, that little tidbit would lead to opportunities that permanently altered his life. Freddie's sister Kashmira was born when he was 6 years old. He formally became a citizen of the United Kingdom and its colonies in 1969. After many years, his formative years were tranquil and affluent in Zanzibar. Just as his notoriety was beginning to grow, his father was a high court cashier for the British Colonial Office. The family had particular prestige because of that employment. While most people didn't live comfortably, they did. When Freddie initially started school, he was taught by Anglican nuns at a missionary-run institution. He got a taste of British education from it, but in 1964 everything changed. In Zanzibar, a bloody revolution began. There were thousands of South Asians and Arabs killed. The Bulsaras were forced to escape. They fled to England, leaving everything behind. Freddie was 17 years old. The transition from island splendor to chilly, bleak Felton came abruptly. Never again was life the same. However, years earlier, the actual beginning had already begun. Freddie's parents enrolled him in Panchganani, India's St. Peter's School when he was 8 years old. Nestled in the hills outside of Mumbai, it was a boarding school in the British tradition. It was a strict place. Students spoke proper English, wore uniforms and complied with the rules. However, there was an unexpected event there. Freddie's parents were requested to pay more for piano lessons after the headmaster saw his talent. Something big was sparked by that little choice. Freddie picked it up fast. He was more than good. He had a gift. He painted, played the piano, performed sports, and acted in plays. Although he was silent, he was never unnoticeable. Because of his teeth, other children called him Bucky. He handled it calmly. He received a school award for being the greatest all-around player when he was 12. That was the essence of Freddie. Excellent in all areas, particularly performance. He returned to Zanzibar in 1963 with a fresh perspective and a renewed feeling of self, but he had already experienced the excitement of the stage before that. Freddie became a member of the Hectics band while he was at St. Peter's. He was just 12. The 4 other males in the gang were Victory, Farang, Derek and Bruce. They sang songs by Little Richard, Cliff Richard, and Elvis. Freddie occasionally sang and played the piano. His ability to replicate music simply by listening to it astounded everyone. He ran his fingers over the keys. The band developed a minor phenomenon at school functions. Children danced, clapped, and screamed. Freddie experienced what it was like to be a star for the first time thanks to that early attention. However, rock music wasn't the only influence on his approach. He also enjoyed the music of Bollywood legends Kishore Kumar and Lata Mangeshkar. Later, Queen's dramatic theatrical songs would be influenced by their emotive singing. He had already passed his grade 4 piano exams when he left St. Peter's. When Freddie's world collapsed in Zanzibar in 1964, he was only 17. Violence was raging on the island. A surge of hostility that targeted Parsi Indians like him claimed thousands of lives. There was nothing his family could do. They ran away. They fled to England after packing everything they could, leaving behind friends, sunshine, and all that is familiar. Neither comfort nor glitz greeted their arrival. Their new existence started in Feltham, a drab suburb located miles from the heart of London. The skies were much more gray than the dwellings. Everything was chilly. This region felt like exile to a child who used to swim in turquoise waters. However, something began to develop during that quiet. Freddie didn't simply make it through the shock, he started to transform. Following his graduation, he enrolled at Isleworth Polytechnic before continuing on to Ealing Art College. The magic started there. A school was not all that Ealing was. It served as a playground for misfits, artists, and rebels. There, Freddie discovered his tribe, those who refused to abide by the rules. While studying graphic design, he dreamed about music just as much. Tim Staffel was introduced to him. They bonded. Both of them were interested in music and had perspectives outside academics. Freddie even contributed to the creation of an underground magazine that made fun of the design community he was expected to enter. He wanted more. Freddie was falling hard for Hendrix outside of school. Something glowed as he heard him. He did more than simply listen. He studied his moves, watched his performances, and drew him. That was the kind of power he desired on stage. He had no desire to sing. He desired to be in charge. He joined the band Ibex as a result of this preoccupation. They were not well known. They shared apartments and performed in taverns. Freddie, however, was content. He had the freedom to try, fail, and try again. He was changing into something else. He had his ears agape. He listened to everything, even John Lennon's lyrics and Aretha Franklin's voice. He enjoyed Elvis Presley's wildness as much as the Beatles' harmonies. His thoughts were like a blender, combining glam, rock, and soul. He and Roger Taylor were both selling clothing at Kensington Market at the same time. They laughed a lot, worked together, and spent time together. It was more than just a job. He gained style from it. He gradually started to stand out after learning what attracted attention and what looked excellent. As Freddie, not as Farouk. Everything began to alter when Freddie Bulsara was just 22 years old. He was unsure of his future after graduating from London's art school. Then he encountered Ibex, a Liverpool band, in August 1969. They were not well known. They'd only performed a few of times. However, they recognized something in him. And Freddie recognized something in them. He picked up all of their tunes in 10 days, added a few of his own, and accompanied them to Bolton. The Octagon Theatre was the location of his first stage appearance. Unbeknownst to the audience, they were witnessing the birth of a star. Freddie was more than just a singer. He shifted. He was brilliant. The stage belonged to him. It was unlike anything the band had ever seen. "We used to just play and not worry about putting on a show," one member remarked. But all of it was altered by Freddie. He strolled like a rock star despite only having one shirt and one pair of pants. Freddie persuaded the group to alter their name by October. Ibex turned into Wreckage. The sound also changed. Freddie began penning further songs. Together, he and guitarist Mike Burson created songs like Fue and Vagabond Outcast. They even recorded Green, one of those songs, at Freddie's London apartment. The recording would endure and be made public years later. But the devastation was short-lived. After the band disbanded, Freddie pursued a brief endeavor named Sour Milk Sea. That also didn't last. Freddie was unfazed though. His thoughts were already more expansive. "We're not going to make it playing all this 3-chord blues crap," he once said to his former bandmates. "We must compose our own music." Then followed the unexpected turn of events. Tim Staffel departed from his band on March 29, 1970. That band was called Smile, and it included Roger Taylor and Brian May. Since art college, Tim and Freddie had been buddies. It was in 1965 that they first met. Freddie wasted no time in leaving Tim. He took over. It seemed fated. Smile was obviously gifted, but Freddie added a unique and captivating quality. He had the confidence, the voice, and the vision. He used to attend their performances and offer advice on how they could improve even before he joined. At first neither Roger nor Brian knew. "He was simply my wacky friend," Roger later remarked. "Just someone who was always up for a good time, not a singer." However, that soon changed. This was what Freddie had been anticipating, and he couldn't go out once he was inside. He pushed for a more theatrical performance from the band. He advised them to be bold with their clothing, stage demeanor, and everything else. They were supposed to be bigger than life. Then he proposed Queen as a new name. It sounded magnificent. It had a royal sound. Roger and Brian paused. Might be too much, they thought. But Freddie refused to back down. It was strong, global, ideal, and sure, a touch controversial, he remarked. He also changed his name to Mercury at about the same period. This band was more than just a new one. It was a complete rebirth. However, they were not yet finished. They had to have a bassist, and it was a challenging part. They made several attempts, but none of them truly clicked. They then met John Deacon one day in 1971. He was a calm 19-year-old, a pupil who isn't as showy as the others. However, he brought his bass and a specially made amplifier to rehearsal. Queen's trademark sound would later be shaped in part by the amplifier. He didn't compete for attention, played with ease, and maintained his humility. That pleased the band. They took him inside. At last, Queen was complete. Freddie's impact was considerably more widespread. He did more than simply alter the name. He also created the logo. He drew a crest, using his art school knowledge. It included fairies, lions, and a crab, all according to the zodiac signs of the band. Roger and John were represented by the lions, Brian by the crab, and Freddie by the fairies. He encircled it all with a huge letter Q, a phoenix above, and a crown in the center. It had a royal appearance, as if it belonged to a band that was supposed to dominate the stage, but their debut record wasn't without its challenges. Trident Studios is where they recorded it, where well-known people had worked, including the Beatles. However, because Queen was still relatively new, they were only allowed to use the studio late at night, after everyone else had finished. After waiting for a while, they would enter and continue recording till dawn. It was draining. They worked for months. There was more unpleasant news when the record was finished. It was postponed. They waited for a long time. In July 1973, it was finally released. There were conflicting reviews. Most people didn't get it, but others did. The band didn't care though. They were confident they were creating something durable. Queen was still attempting to discover their true identity in 1974. Although their previous albums were talented, they lacked coherence. Too much attempting to be something else, too lengthy, and too complicated. However, a heart attack completely altered everything. At this point, Freddie Mercury began to take ownership of his sound and ceased experimenting. Even though the songs were only 3 minutes long, he made them feel larger, tightened them up, and added drama and glitz. Then Killer Queen arrived, and all of a sudden, they were more than just another band. The band was them. After the song became viral in the UK and America, Queen eventually made a breakthrough. However, there was absolutely no glamour behind the scenes. Queen had no money. The band was paid like part-timers, but Trident Studios, its label, pocketed the majority of the earnings. Despite having hits, they were unable to pay for decent housing. John Deacon was unable to obtain a home loan, and Freddie lived in a small damp apartment. Then they lost their temper. They gained their freedom after months of court battles, but at a high cost. They were forced to forfeit potential album royalties and pay out hundreds of thousands. They chose to record their most costly album ever right after they were let free, so the timing was precarious. It wasn't simply another record, a night at the opera. It was a desperate attempt. They spent more money and occupied 7 studios than any other British band, and placed all of their money on it succeeding. They were done if it didn't work. They had to strive higher because of the crushing pressure. Always the most audacious, Freddie entered with Bohemian Rhapsody, a 6-minute behemoth. At first, nobody understood it. Operatic lunacy, no chorus. Why would anyone put that on the radio? Freddie wasn't asking though, he was revealing. In a single day, he produced a low-budget yet visually captivating video, altered the laws of pop music, and forced it out. For 9 weeks, the song remained at the top of the charts. It was unique, and it was successful. With that song, Freddie transformed not simply the music but also himself. He changed while he was on stage. He was strutting, commanding, and acting like a man possessed in addition to singing. He could have sad lows and insane highs in his voice. He had the ability to make every person in the 20,000 person crowd feel as though he was singing specifically for them. He broke that microphone stand by accident. He transformed it into a hallmark technique, a weapon, and a prop. When he sang Bohemian Rhapsody live for the first time, the audience was more than just concertgoers. They were witnessing a showman at his best. Then came that 1977 evening, Hall at Bingley. The audience abruptly began singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" when the band finished playing. It was not intended. It simply occurred. Freddie looked on with wonder. "We need songs for this," he remarked, turning to Brian May. "We will rock you and we are the champions." We're inspired by the occasion. One unfiltered, heartfelt interaction with the crowd gave rise to two of the most famous stadium choruses in history. Mercury was no longer merely a performer. He was making music that would be yelled back at him by crowds. And they did. Each and every evening, Freddie had moved Queen away from their glam rock beginnings by the time Another One Bites the Dust was released in 1980. The tune was unexpected, lively and edgy. People didn't think Queen could do it. However, they did. It turned become their biggest hit in the US. Mercury was never one lane. He continued to move and reinvent himself. His music continued to attract more listeners as a result. Nobody was able to restrain him. Success also brought gluttony. Mercury didn't think that money should be saved. He thought it should be spent. He purchased items that he liked. His sister received a new kitchen if she required one. He would have a jewelry store open for him if it was closed. He had an insane birthday party in Ibiza. A massive cake inspired by Gaudi's church, 700 guests and hundreds of shattered glasses at the conclusion. Freddie didn't simply lead a lavish life. No one lived louder than him. However, not everything he attempted was successful. At the midst of the apartheid era, Queen chose to perform at Sun City, South Africa, in 1984. Although it was lawful, it generated controversy. A cultural boycott took place. The majority of artists declined to attend. Queen went nevertheless. Others disagreed with their assertion that it was not political. It was a vicious blowback. They were criticized in protest songs, fined, and banned. Even the band acknowledged years later that they could have erred. They said they didn't do it for financial gain, but the damage was done. There was always something new for Freddie Mercury to pursue. That pursuit took Queen into uncharted territory. In 1980, when they composed the music for the movie Flash Gordon, only a few of the tracks featured lyrics, and it wasn't a full-fledged rock album. The majority of the work was done by Brian May, who jumped right into synthesizers, which were still relatively new to the group. The fans were unsure on how to interpret it. Some others felt that the music was more thrilling than the film. Some didn't understand it at all. However, that odd project was a sign of something more significant. Not everyone would follow Queen as she was set to change course. With Hot Space, they veered even farther off track in just 2 years. Disco, funk, and synths were all over. People didn't remember the Queen. Freddie and John Deacon were interested. Roger and Brian weren't. Both the damage and the anxiety were readily apparent. In Munich, lengthy nights became protracted altercations. Everyone had too much to drink. They were emotionally destroyed, according to Brian. Roger accused Paul Prentor, Freddie's manager, of pressuring the group to play homosexual club music. For some, it was more than just a poor record. It was like being betrayed. While some fans turned away, others continued to listen. Michael Jackson made notes. The musicians listened. Hot Space flopped, perhaps. However, in the years that followed, its traces were everywhere. Amidst all of this tumult, a miraculous event occurred. In a Swiss studio, Queen met David Bowie. What was once a jam became under strain. The bass line, Deacon without compromise. The vitality, complete conflict. Despite the frequent arguments between Freddie and Bowie, that spark made the song memorable. It immediately shot to the top. It also demonstrated something. Even if they were disintegrating behind the scenes, they could still surprise people. They needed a vacation by 1983. They weren't simply worn out, they were exhausted. They had been touring, recording, and fighting for years. They halted now. Queen hit pause for the first time since they started. They were able to breathe during the interval. But it wasn't a complete solution. There was a rift within the band. Deacon and Freddie wanted more dancing. Roger and Brian held on to rock. The situation was made worse by Freddie's devotion to the printer. Nevertheless, that quiet allowed them to reflect on their identity and future potential. Then in 1984, the construction began. They required the reset. Freddie added flair. Deacon added cadence. However, Roger and Brian were able to get their guitars at last. It was a well-balanced mix of pop and rock. Radio Gaga went off. I Want to Break Free became a national anthem. The band had returned. With the exception of America, the entire world took note when they remained on the charts for almost 2 years. The band was seen in drag in the I Want to Break Free music video. The joke well received in the UK. MTV didn't. The video was prohibited. Supporters walked away. When Freddie wore the costume on stage in Rio, the audience hurled objects at him. Because of how cruel it was, Queen never truly recovered in the United States. Freddie continued. He needed to prove something else. His solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, was released in 1985. It was all Freddie, all him, no compromises. It was full of dance beats, melancholy songs, and cheeky fun, and he dedicated it to his pets. Fans differed in their opinions. The United States seldom paid attention. However, Freddie didn't care about sales. It has to do with freedom. He had been imprisoned in the Queen machine for years. He was doing it his own way now. Then he did something that nobody anticipated. He partnered with Montserrat Caballé, an opera star. He managed to convince her to say yes, even though she was one of his heroines. In a Barcelona hotel, they first met. He sang her portions in falsetto while playing a demo for her. She was taken aback. Barcelona was magical when they captured it on tape. It was the first time rock and opera had been combined. The song became an anthem when Barcelona was selected for the 1992 Olympics. They even collaborated to create an entire album. Similar to Freddie, it was daring, odd, and lovely. Even though Freddie Mercury was aware of his limited time, he continued to perform. He entered the studio with Queen and resumed recording in early 1988, only a few months after receiving an HIV diagnosis. He kept it from the public. He was not looking for pity. All he wanted to do was sing, and he managed to give everything he had in spite of all the suffering and anxiety. The outcome was the miracle. An album that sounded more like a victory than a departure. In Europe it peaked at #1. Although people were unaware of it at the time, it was a multifaceted miracle. Innuendo followed. Even though Freddie's body had weakened by the time they worked on that album, his voice was still powerful. Freddie asked them to continue writing tunes. According to Brian May, how ill he was didn't matter to him. He wished to continue. "You can finish it after I'm gone," he informed them, but he gave them everything he had while he was still here. #1 was reached by the title track. Like him, it was audacious, eerie, and magnificent. However, the reality was becoming more difficult to conceal in public. Freddie took the stage at the Brit Awards on February 18, 1990, to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award alongside Queen. He only said 5 words, not much. "I'm grateful, good night." More was communicated by his silence than by his words. The rumors that had been circulating for years suddenly felt very true since he appeared emaciated and exhausted. But he still grinned. He gestured. Even his fans didn't want to see how hurt he was. Later, his bandmates claimed that they never discussed his ailment. There was an unwritten rule. They didn't ask if Freddie didn't want to speak it. He resumed recording in the studio. On some days he was scarcely able to stand. He was only able to sing for an hour or two on some days. Nevertheless, he showed up. It wasn't a depressing place, according to the engineers he worked with. There was a lot of chuckling. Freddie maintained a light-hearted tone. He refused to let the darkness prevail, even while his body was giving up. He didn't think twice when they asked him to do the vocals for The Show Must Go On. "I'll fucking do it, darling," he said. He then finished a tumbler of vodka and performed flawlessly in a single take. One of his most impactful performances of his career was that one. His final music video, These Are the Days of Our Lives, was shot in May 1991. Unless you paid great attention, you wouldn't realize it was a farewell. To conceal his true level of illness, it was shot in black and white. He had his kitties drawn on a waistcoat that he wore. He joked, grinned, and continued to take till he was happy. At the end of the video, he muttered, "I still love you," while staring directly into the camera. His last communication was that he made sure everyone knew he loved them to the last end, even though he knew what was coming. He came to a final conclusion in November. A few months later, no more prescription drugs, only painkillers. He was prepared. Peace was what he desired. His companions were by his side all the time. He was no longer able to paint. He laughed despite his poor vision. He continued to tell stories. He instructed the Queen's manager to make a public announcement on November 22, revealing his AIDS diagnosis. The news broke about 8 p.m., and Freddie Mercury, sprawled in his bed, grinned right then. It was the most laid back he had seen him in years. According to his aide, the secret has vanished. The battle was nearly over. Freddie Mercury passed away on November 24, 1991, at precisely 6:48 p.m. Less than 24 hours later, he was 45. The voice of the world was gone, a legend, and the first rock star to publicly pass away from the illness during a period when the term AIDS was unsettling. His passing thrust the discussion into the public eye. It could no longer be disregarded. However, Freddie left a mystery that no concert could solve, even in death. He was cremated at West London's Kensal Green Cemetery. As everyone knew, nobody was aware of what had become of his ashes. They were left unclaimed for more than a year. In the end, they were taken by his best friend and ex-lover Mary Austin, who never disclosed their destination. Fans discovered a tiny plaque buried at the cemetery in 2013. It had his birth and death dates, his true name, and a letter in French that was only signed with an M. However, it quickly disappeared, perhaps taken out to protect the secret.